Hello everyone, this is video number 2, the 2D editor MBedit. The topics of this video will be what MBedit is and why it's important to use it, how to launch and navigate the tool, the interface, mainly the waterfall and the long track displays, the core editing features like flagging and unflagging soundings, and saving and integrating edits into process files, plus some best practices and limitations of this tool. On screen you can see some keyboard shortcuts. They may be helpful if you plan to use this tool a lot. You can find this image if you go to the MB System tutorial and look into the folder YouTube Extras. There you can find this image. Now let's proceed. For this video, I assume that you have downloaded the MB System tutorial, downloaded the sample dataset, and run the commands from the first chapter. They are also available as a script where you can run all commands at once. So let's start. You can start the tool by simply typing MBedit. And if you want to work with a list of files, you can give it the name of a data list. So first things first, one of the things you cannot do, unfortunately, is to resize this screen. So please leave it as is. If you open MBedit and you get presented with this message, do you want to apply the saved edits to the data? Always say yes. If you say no, you will reset the file. So if you are editing a very long file that took perhaps an hour or two or even more, remember you always have to say yes. Alright, now that we have MBedit open, let's talk a little bit about it. As the name says, is an editor of data and is a 2D editor where I can only see the pings one by one with no 3D view. So you may ask yourself, why it's important to use such a tool when we have a 3D editor that looks far more powerful? Well, the question is, sometimes you have to edit small artifacts that are very, very difficult to see using the 3D editor. Therefore, this editor is very important. Also, when we are working with data of very high resolution, for example, data acquired by AUVs or ROVs, we want to keep very tight control of how the data is and what are we removing out of the data, because we are trying to preserve the highest resolution possible. Therefore, this editor becomes the go-to tool. So what we have here, we have the pings with the depth at the center of the swath, and we have the timestamp with date and time, and we have the ping numbers. Here we have a bar where we can see where we are within this file, and since we loaded a data list, I can see that I'm at file 1 out of 14, and here's the file name. As I specify here, I can see 10 pings and I can jump 5 pings ahead. So meaning that I will always overlap 5 pings. I can change that, for instance, to 9 so that I always remain with 1 ping from the previous view. Another key aspect that is very important to mention is the vertical exaggeration. In many situations, I have to change the vertical exaggeration so that I can see artifacts in the data. However, it's very important to mention that you should keep a certain scale or a certain pattern with the vertical exaggeration. So if you change it too much, you may actually see things that look like artifacts, but it's just the normal variability of the data. So it's important to keep it within a certain limit. I tend to work with a vertical exaggeration of 2 to maximum 5 in some cases. But in general, I work with a vertical acceleration in around 2.5. So, as we can see here, we can see the pings in a sequence, ping number 1 and so on, but we can also stack them with this other view called a long track view. Here I can see the artifact, but since I'm stacking 10 pings in one line, it starts to be difficult to notice. But in this case, I can change the vertical exaggeration to, let's say, 5, and then this problem with the data becomes more pronounced. So now if I go with erase, I can remove those soundings. And if I go back to waterfall view, I can see that I removed most of the problems, but I still didn't catch this one and this one. In cases like that, I could go with grab, for instance, and I can drag a box and remove that sounding and that sounding. So as you can see, we can do very small and surgical editing of the data. That gives us a lot of power, but on the other hand, gives us a very time-consuming workflow. So therefore, you have to choose in which situations MBEdit may be suitable for you. If we are done editing, we can press quit, and then the edits we made are saved to an ESF file, which will be merged when we run MB process again and create process files.